As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I am pleased to have the opportunity to support and speak on the motion today. I want to commend all of those who worked on compiling the report, the CNAG's office, the PAC Secretariat, my colleagues on PAC, and Chairman Brian Stanley and the witnesses who appeared before us. The Public Accounts Committee met with the board of the National Paediatric Children's Hospital on 2 occasions, February the 9th, 2021 and July 13th, 2021. And the committee then published a report on these 2 meetings in March of this year, and the report contained a number of recommendations. The board of the National Paediatric Hospital Development was requested to provide an update in respect of each of the relevant recommendations. No updates were received by the close of business of the 15th of June 2022. And the fact that no updates were received from the board by June 15th, unfortunately, in my view, Minister, illustrates the difficulty that many members of the committee have faced in trying to get information from members of the board, and it's been frustrating to say the very least. Recommendation 1 was to publish a report on the timeline and the cost of the National Paediatric Hospital. The Department of Health refused on the basis that this information was commercially sensitive. During the 2 meetings with the board on the dates referred to previously, I also received non-answers to questions citing the commercial sensitivity of the project as the reason for not answering. And in the second meeting on July 13th, I said the following: there is a vacuum in transparency and accountability with regards to this project. There have not been any real answers from the board representatives this morning. I appreciate that we can have commercial sensitivity, but we can take it too far. And I believe the board is taking the interpretation in the broadest possible sense in respect of commercial sensitivity. And as a member of the committee, I believe the information being requested is in the public interest. Per bed, Minister, this particular project is on course to be the most expensive hospital ever built in the history of humanity. Not only is it going to be the most expensive hospital ever built, it looks like it could end up being over 2 times more expensive than the second most expensive hospital ever built per bed. And yet members of the Public Accounts Committee have continually been fobbed off when trying to get to the bottom of the matter. Even at the NPHD board's last appearance in front of the PAC, in response to heavily laid criticism from the Deputy Chair, Verona Murphy, on the day, that the board's attitude of indifference to the PAC had to be addressed, that we had a job to do, and Mr Gunning noted those remarks and said that he took on board those comments and would ensure everything possible would be done in the future to address the issues as raised. That chair lasted for all of about 40 minutes, as I asked a straightforward question in which Mr Gunning failed to answer. Now, moving on, Chair, inflation is one area of concern that is having a major impact, not just on the cost of living for everyone, but it's also going to have a major impact on the cost of this project. And I questioned the members of the board on the inflation clause in the contracts, and I was informed by Mr Gunning and Mr Devine, and I quote, "There is an inflation clause in the contract. It states that construction inflation above 4% becomes a cost the state will bear, and below 4% it is the contractor's responsibility. It's based on an average of 3 published tender inflation indices from Linesight, AECOM and the Society of Chartered Surveyors of Ireland." I asked Mr Devine if he believed that that figure of 4% was a little low, given that the rates at the time, for instance, construction price inflation, was at 7%. I was told that the 4% figure was the result of detailed analysis we did back in 2016, and we issued the job out to tender. Unfortunately, it looks as though our current inflation predicament may result in the taxpayer having to pick up the tab for even more overruns. And with regard to the project as a whole, I have some sympathy for yourself and Minister Donnelly. He has been handed what I would term a poisoned chalice, and he's had to oversee the mess created this time as a minister. The contracts and design were started when Taoiseach Varadkar was Minister for Health, and the construction of the project began when Minister Harris was Minister for Health. And the government has really been hiding this from the public in terms of the cost of the hospital and the huge difficulties with it. It's gone from 600 million to 1.5 billion. And I remember Leo Varadkar saying that short of an asteroid hitting the planet, this hospital will be finished this year. And that was in 2020. They're not my words, Minister. They're the words of our current Oireachtas that were made in January of 2020, 2.5 years on. The cost difficulties are getting worse. It looks as though it may be at least 2024 before the hospital sees a patient. And it is as difficult as ever to get a proper picture of what's actually going on. That's not to say, Chair, I, for one, as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, will keep trying. And I'd just like to say it was also Mr Gunning and Mr Devine assured the committee that the budget to fit out this hospital was still at 300 million. I don't see how that's possible, Minister. If we're already at inflation, which, by the way, above 4% is apparently going to be paid in or around the 10% mark, how our budget of 300 million to kit out the hospital stays at 300 million. So I think it's time that we got a proper figure that reflected the reality. And I don't blame the war in Ukraine on this one. I think there has been delays. There have been of a very serious nature. Of course, we couldn't have predicted COVID, but we did have templates, such as other projects around the world that saw very serious delays and the doubling of project costs. And I think it was a serious error to keep our inflation level at 4% in the contracts, particularly when it was at 7%. We now are paying seriously as the Exchequer for that mistake. Thank you, Chair.